my phone lit up with a notification from an unknown number. Keep acting normal and stay right where you are. Don't text me back. Then they sent me 3 different password-protected video attachments. I clicked into the message to see 3 dots appearing, then disappearing, followed by the passwords to these videos. In them, 3 masked people I faintly recognized were triumphantly walking out of a courtroom. I clicked out and hit play on the voice note the number had now sent me. These people think you snitched to the police on them. Call someone to help you. My heart sank to my stomach. I had snitched on them. But nobody was supposed to know that. I'd done it 8 months ago after 3 cartel members I used to know personally moved into the apartment below mine. My anonymous tip was supposed to be safe. A one-time hotline call to the police off a burner phone, after which I moved states and even changed my name. I was already breathing heavily, wondering how quickly they could find me. Then the anonymous number sent another message, screenshots this time, showing text conversations between the 3 brothers. We got him. He's in those rundown apartments by the woods at Brown Avenue. I had to take an extra dose of my anxiety medication to get my heart rate under control. More screenshots flooded in. Been watching him for 3 weeks now. Leaves at 7:15 for work. Back by 6:30. Lives alone. They had photos. Me at my mailbox. Me taking out trash. Me entering the building. 5th floor, apartment D. We make an example of him tonight. I called 911 immediately, my hands shaking. 911, what's your emergency? I need help, I started, voice trembling. I have proof that 3 cartel members are planning to kill me tonight. I probably sounded crazy. What proof, sir? She replied. Screenshots warning me. They've been stalking me. Who sent you these screenshots? I don't know. Someone. They have a group chat. She paused. Are these screenshots from an anonymous source? Yes, but, sir, she interrupted me. Our protocol forbids us from dispatching units based on anonymous warnings. They're going to kill me, I yelled into my phone. Unless you are in immediate danger right now, please file a report at the station, she replied. I was about to continue arguing when all of a sudden my phone buzzed with another call. Rick, the security guard of the building, was calling my cell. Hey man, 3 guys were just here asking about you. Said they were your cousins from out of town. I didn't tell them anything, but they're hanging around outside. I thanked him and hung up, then called 911 again immediately. The same woman answered. 911, what's your emergency? They're outside, I screamed into the phone. My apartment building manager just called me to say he saw them outside. The woman paused for a moment. Okay, please remain calm, sir. I will dispatch units to your address right away. They will be with you in 20 minutes. I hung up. My heart jumped. I'd be dead in 20 minutes. But I knew I had no more time to go back and forth. I hung up and started grabbing my things. I wasn't waiting. I had to get to my car and get out. I took the stairs down to the parking garage. As I pushed through the heavy door, I saw him immediately. Miguel, the youngest brother, leaning against a pillar just around the corner of my car. If I was quiet, I could get out without him noticing. I started tiptoeing over, 50 feet to my car, then 40, 30. I could run to it and get there quickly but risk being seen. I decided to keep moving slowly. I was 10 feet away when it happened. Carlos, the middle brother, peered around the corner and locked eyes with me. How are you, sir? He asked warmly. Do you know the best places to eat around here? I just moved. He was testing me. I smiled and told him I was new as well. He looked at me weird for a second. What a coincidence. His eyes narrowed. Anyway, you have a good day, sir. He started walking away. I had a choice to make. Get in my car and undoubtedly be followed, or pretend I'm not onto them, then sneak back into the apartment and try to get away. I unlocked my car door, fiddled around my glove compartment like I was getting something, then made a dramatic gesture like what I was looking for wasn't here. Slowly, I turned and walked back to the entrance stairwell, forcing myself not to run, my eyes subtly darting around trying to spot them. Inside my apartment, I locked the deadbolt and immediately went to the window. The woods were right behind me. I could run there. That's when my phone rang again. The security guard. Hello? I answered. Hey, is this apartment 5D? The voice wasn't the security guard's. It was Ramon's, the oldest brother's. This is your neighbor from down the hall. I just wanted to drop off a package that was delivered to me by mistake. I stayed silent. I knew he was testing to see if they had the right apartment number, and now they knew they did. Suddenly, my phone buzzed again. The anonymous number from earlier. Get out now. They're in the building. Suddenly, I could hear footsteps in the stairwell, multiple sets, heavy and fast. The elevator had been broken for 2 months. Those stairs were the only way up or down. The footsteps reached my floor and stopped right outside my door. The doorknob started turning slowly, then rattling, then pounding once they realized it was locked. Open up! We just want to talk! The door started splintering. The police should have been here by now. I grabbed my dresser with both hands and started dragging it across the floor toward the door. My fingers kept slipping because I was shaking so hard. The wood scraped loud against the floor, and I could hear them on the other side getting more aggressive with their pounding. I finally got the dresser wedged against the door just as the pounding stopped. Everything went quiet for maybe 3 seconds. Then I heard Ramon's voice coming through the door, calm and friendly. "Hey man, we just want to talk to you about some things. Open up." The door frame was already cracking near the hinges, and I knew that dresser wasn't going to hold them for long. I backed away from the door and ran toward my bedroom. The window faced the backwoods, and I'd looked out at those trees 100 times without ever thinking they might save my life. I shoved the window open hard, and cold air hit my face. My breath came out in white clouds. I looked down and saw this narrow metal ledge running along the building about a foot below the window. 2 windows over there was an old fire escape that I'd never paid attention to before. That was my only way out. I could hear them hitting the door again, and the dresser was scraping backward with each hit. I grabbed my phone from my pocket and made sure I had my wallet and keys. Then I climbed out onto that ledge. My back pressed flat against the brick wall, and I could feel every rough edge digging into my shoulder blades. The ledge was maybe 6 inches wide, and my feet barely fit. I started shuffling sideways toward the fire escape, moving slow because I was scared to go fast. Behind me, I heard the apartment door finally crash open. Wood splintered, and the dresser scraped across the floor as they shoved it aside. I could hear their footsteps pounding through my living room. Heavy boots on the cheap carpet, multiple sets moving fast. I kept shuffling along the ledge, my fingers trying to find anything to grip on the brick wall. There was nothing. Just flat wall and me trying not to look down at the parking lot 5 stories below. My foot slipped. The sole of my shoe skidded on something wet on the metal, and my leg went out from under me. I scraped my shin hard against the edge of the ledge as I caught myself. The pain shot up my leg sharp and immediate, but I bit down on my tongue to keep from yelling. I could taste blood in my mouth from biting too hard. I could hear them in my bedroom now, footsteps right by the window I'd just climbed out of. Someone was pulling open my closet door. Another person was checking under the bed. I moved faster even though my legs were shaking and telling me to freeze up. The fire escape was right there. Just 3 more feet of shuffling along this ledge. 2 feet, 1 foot. I reached out and grabbed the metal railing of the fire escape and pulled myself onto it. The metal was cold and rusty under my hands. I dropped down to the next level and then the next one. My shoes made loud clanging sounds on the metal stairs that echoed in the quiet night. Someone shouted from my window, but I was already 2 floors down. I took the stairs 3 at a time, jumping and grabbing the railings to swing myself around the corners faster. 4th floor, 3rd floor, 2nd floor. The ground level was right there near this maintenance area I'd never noticed before. I pulled out my phone and tried to call Rick, but the line was busy. He was probably dealing with all the chaos in the building. I opened my texts and found Darren's number. I typed fast, "Need help. Set off your car alarm. Now, please." I hit send and kept moving along the back of the building. 30 seconds later, I heard a car alarm start blaring from the front parking lot. Then I heard shouting, at least 2 different voices yelling at each other about checking the parking lot. Their footsteps moved away from where I was. I spotted this door that led into some kind of maintenance corridor. I'd lived here 8 months and never knew this existed. I pulled the door open and slipped inside. The space was dim with just a few small lights along the ceiling. I moved past water heaters that were making gurgling sounds, past electrical panels with warning stickers, past stacks of old paint cans and broken furniture. My phone buzzed in my hand, another message from that anonymous number. "Turn left at the next junction." I looked ahead and saw the corridor split into 2 directions. I went left like they said. Whoever was helping me knew this building better than I did. The corridor kept going and I followed it, trying to walk quiet but also fast. It opened up near the building's rear service entrance. I stopped there and pressed myself against the wall. I was breathing so hard I thought I might pass out. I forced myself to slow down my breathing and listen. Footsteps somewhere above me, distant voices. And then I heard sirens. They were getting louder. I couldn't tell if they were actually coming here or just driving past on the main road. I stood there trying to figure out if I should wait for the police or keep running. From upstairs, I heard loud crashing sounds, thuds that shook the building. They were tearing apart my apartment looking for me. Then I heard neighbors yelling, people shouting about the noise and what was happening, some woman screaming about calling the police, a man yelling for everyone to get back in their apartments. I felt sick thinking about how I'd brought this danger to everyone in the building. All these people just trying to live their lives, and now they had cartel members smashing through apartments. But I pushed that guilt down because I needed to focus on staying alive. I pulled out my phone again and called 911. A different dispatcher answered this time. 911, what's your emergency? I tried to keep my voice steady. I called earlier about 3 men trying to kill me. They're in my building right now. They're tearing apart apartments and other tenants are in danger. Armed men ransacking the building at Brown Avenue Apartments. The dispatcher's voice changed when I mentioned other tenants. Units are already en route to that location, sir. Can you tell me exactly what's happening? I could hear her typing fast. They broke into my apartment. Now they're searching the building for me. Neighbors are screaming. You need to get here now. She said something about the units being close, but I could tell from her tone that the situation was messy. Nobody knew exactly what was happening or where anyone was. I hung up and looked at my phone. The battery was at 30%. The anonymous number hadn't sent anything new. The sirens were definitely getting closer now. I looked around and spotted a red fire alarm box on the wall about 10 feet away. I ran to it and smashed the glass with my elbow. The alarm started blaring instantly, and the sound was so loud it hurt my ears. Within seconds, I could hear doors opening upstairs and people shouting over the alarm. The evacuation was starting. I moved quickly down the corridor toward the service entrance area and saw a big cardboard box sitting near the door with a sign that said, "Free clothes donations." I dug through it fast and grabbed a dark blue hoodie that looked about my size. I pulled it on and flipped the hood up over my head. My hands were still shaking, but at least now I had some kind of disguise. The alarm kept blaring, and I could hear more doors opening and people flooding into the hallways above me. I needed to get to Rick's office and see what was happening on the cameras. I pushed through a door that led to the ground floor main hallway and started moving toward the security office near the front lobby. People were coming down the stairs now in groups, some of them looking confused and annoyed about the alarm. A woman with a baby was asking someone if this was a drill. An old man was complaining loudly about the noise. I kept my head down and walked fast, but not too fast. Rick's office was a small room off the main lobby with a window that looked out at the entrance area. I could see him through the window sitting at his desk with his phone pressed to his ear and his eyes on the monitor screens in front of him. I pushed the door open and he looked up fast. His face relaxed a little when he saw it was me. He waved me in quickly and I shut the door behind me. He pointed at the monitors without saying anything, and I moved closer to look. The screens showed different camera angles from around the building. On one screen, I could see Ramon on the 5th floor moving down the hallway and checking doors. On another screen, Carlos was on the 3rd floor doing the same thing. On a third screen, Miguel was on the 2nd floor heading toward the stairwell. Rick finished his call and put his phone down. He told me the police were almost here and I should stay right here in the office where it was safe. I watched Miguel on the monitor getting closer to the ground floor stairwell. My stomach dropped. If I stayed here, I'd be trapped when he reached the ground level. I told Rick I couldn't risk it. He started to argue, but I was already moving toward the door. I thanked him fast for everything he'd done and for not giving me up to Carlos earlier. He looked worried, but he nodded and told me to be careful. I slipped back out into the hallway where more people were evacuating now. The alarm was still going and everyone looked stressed and confused. I pulled my hood down lower and joined a group of about 8 people heading toward the main stairwell. We moved together down the hallway and into the stairwell. The sound of our footsteps echoed off the concrete walls. I kept my head down and stayed in the middle of the group. We went down from the ground floor to the basement level and then started going back up toward the exit. On the 3rd floor landing, the group slowed down because there were more people coming from that floor. I was looking down at my feet when someone pushed past me going up the stairs. I looked up and it was Miguel. He was moving fast and looking around at faces. I shoved past him hard using the crowd as cover. He stumbled a little but kept going up. I didn't look back. I just kept moving down with the group. We reached the ground floor exit and pushed through the doors into the cold night air. There were people everywhere now, standing in groups on the sidewalk and in the parking lot. Some were in pajamas, some had grabbed coats. Everyone looked cold and annoyed. I broke away from my group and headed straight for the parking lot where my car was parked. I could see it under one of the lot lights about 50 yards away. I walked fast, weaving between people and parked cars. When I got to my car, I stopped. The front driver's side tire was completely flat, not just low, but totally flat against the ground. I crouched down next to it and looked closer. The valve cap was sitting on the ground next to the tire. I picked it up and looked at the valve stem. The core was gone. Someone had removed it, so the air would leak out slowly over time. They'd done this hours ago, probably when they first started watching the building tonight. My phone buzzed in my pocket and I pulled it out. Another message from the anonymous number. It was a long paragraph this time explaining that the leak about my location came from courthouse contacts, not from the police department. Someone who worked at the courthouse had access to witness information and had been selling it. The message said there was a whole network of people doing this. I felt rage building in my chest. The system that was supposed to protect me had failed because someone wanted money, but I didn't have time to think about it. I needed to move. I stood up and looked around the parking lot. I could see Carlos near the building entrance about 100 yards away. He was scanning the crowd slowly and methodically. I turned and walked quickly toward the street. There was a laundromat on the corner about half a block away, and the lights were still on inside. I could see the evacuated residents starting to gather on the sidewalk near it because they had nowhere else to go. I pulled out my phone while I walked and found the detective line number I'd saved months ago. I called it and got a voicemail. I left a message saying my name and my case number from 8 months ago and that I needed Detective Kira Campos to call me immediately. I said it was an emergency and that the 3 men from my case were trying to kill me tonight. I gave my current phone number and hung up. I reached the laundromat and pulled the door open. It was bright and warm inside. There were a few washing machines running, but no customers. I walked to the back where the bathroom was and went inside. I locked the door and leaned against the sink. I pulled out my phone again and opened my texts. I found Darren's number and sent him a message asking what he could see from his apartment window. He responded almost right away saying police cars were pulling up to the building, but the brothers had disappeared into the crowd. He said a lot of people were standing around outside and the cops were trying to figure out what was going on. I texted back telling him to stay inside and lock his door. I came out of the bathroom and moved to the front window of the laundromat. I could see the building from here. There were 3 police cars parked out front now with their lights flashing. Officers were talking to people in the crowd and trying to get information, but I wasn't there anymore, so they didn't know who they were looking for. I felt angry and helpless watching it all happen. We were all in the same area but completely disconnected. The police were looking for me but didn't know what I looked like. The brothers were looking for me and knew exactly what I looked like, and I was stuck watching from a laundromat window hoping nobody spotted me. I saw Carlos walking across the parking lot toward where Rick was standing near his security booth. Carlos approached him and I could see them talking. Carlos was gesturing around with his hands like he was asking questions. Rick stood there calm and professional. He didn't point in any direction or gesture toward anything specific. He just stood there talking and keeping his body language neutral. After about a minute, Carlos walked away looking angry and frustrated. Rick stayed where he was and pulled out his phone. I hoped he was calling the police to tell them what was happening. My phone started buzzing in my pocket and I pulled it out fast. Unknown number, but I answered anyway. A woman's voice came through asking if this was the person who left a message for Detective Campos about a case from 8 months ago. I said yes, and she told me she needed to verify my identity first. She asked me 3 questions from my original statement back then. What color was the car I saw them loading packages into? What time of night did I make the call? What street did I live on at the time? I answered all 3 correctly, and she went quiet for a second. Then she said her name was Kira Campos, and she remembered my case. She said she believed me back then, and she believed me now. That gave me a tiny bit of hope that maybe someone would actually help me this time. I told her everything was happening right now, and I was hiding in a laundromat watching police cars outside my building. She asked if I had any proof of what was going on tonight. I told her yes and started forwarding her everything while we stayed on the phone. The screenshots from the anonymous number showing the brothers' group chat, the videos of them walking out of the courtroom, the call logs from Rick warning me about them, the photos they had of me at my mailbox and taking out trash. I sent it all and waited while she looked through everything. She didn't say anything for maybe a minute, and I could hear her clicking through files on her end. Finally, she came back on and said this was serious enough for immediate protective measures and possible charges against the brothers. She said what they did tonight crossed multiple lines, and she could work with this evidence. I felt some relief, but I was still stuck in a laundromat watching them search for me. Kira told me I needed to get to the precinct so we could do this properly with official statements and paperwork. She said I should order a rideshare under a fake pickup name, and she would have officers waiting for me when I arrived. I hesitated because I didn't know if I could trust that the brothers wouldn't spot me getting into a car right outside. They were still out there somewhere, and they knew what I looked like. Kira seemed to understand my concern and said she would think of an alternative while I stayed hidden. She told me to keep my phone on and wait for her to call back. I agreed, and we hung up. My phone buzzed again right away, but this time it was a text from the anonymous number. The message said her name was Mercedes Vega, and she had been tracking the brothers through a synced account that one of them didn't know about. She explained that Carlos had given Miguel access to his phone for something weeks ago, and Miguel had set up a sync without telling him. Mercedes had access to that sync somehow and could see their locations in real time. She sent me a screenshot showing 3 dots on a map. One was near the front of my building. One was 2 blocks away heading south. The third one was moving toward the laundromat area where I was hiding. I texted back thanking her and asking how she knew where I was. She said she had been watching me move through the neighborhood and wanted to make sure I stayed ahead of them. I didn't have time to question it more. I needed to move now. I went to the back of the laundromat where there was an exit door that led to an alley. I pushed it open slowly and looked both ways. The alley was empty and dark with dumpsters lined up on one side. I slipped out and started moving quickly away from the building complex. I kept my head down and walked fast without running, because running would draw attention. I made it maybe 30 feet when I heard an engine behind me. I glanced back and saw a dark sedan rolling slowly down the alley. I didn't recognize the car and couldn't see who was driving through the tinted windows. The car kept pace with me, and I realized I couldn't get into any rideshare now because they would follow me. I spotted a narrow walkway between 2 buildings on my left and cut through it fast. The sedan couldn't follow because the gap was too small for a car. I came out on a busier street with more people walking around and some shops still open. I blended into the crowd and kept moving. I looked back toward my apartment building and could see it from here. There were evacuated residents huddled outside in the cold. Some of them looked angry about being displaced and having their night disrupted. I felt guilty for bringing this trouble to their building, but the guilt turned into something else. Resolve, maybe. I needed to formally cooperate with police, so these guys would face real consequences for what they did. Not just to me, but to everyone they scared tonight. I found a convenience store on the corner and went inside. The clerk barely looked up from his phone. I grabbed a cheap burner phone from the rack and paid cash for it. Then I went back outside and powered down my main phone, except for keeping it on just enough to stay in contact with Kira and Mercedes. I turned on the burner and sent Kira a text from the new number telling her it was me. She responded right away asking me another security question to verify. She wanted to know what kind of car I drove back at my old place 8 months ago. I told her and she confirmed it was correct. She said she had an idea for where we could meet that would be safer than the precinct. There was a public library 2 miles away that had security cameras and stayed open late. She suggested I go there and she would meet me with another officer. I agreed and started walking in that direction. I took a complicated route instead of going straight. I went down one street, then cut through a parking lot, then doubled back on another street. I checked behind me constantly to make sure nobody was following. Every time I saw headlights, I tensed up, but none of them slowed down near me. It took me almost 40 minutes to walk 2 miles because of all the detours. The library was warm and quiet when I finally got there. Most of the people inside were students with laptops or older folks reading newspapers. I found a table near the security desk where I could see both entrances. I sat down and waited. My hands were still shaking, and I kept checking my phone for updates from Mercedes about where the brothers were. 20 minutes went by, and then I saw Kira walk in with a uniformed officer. She looked around until she spotted me and then came over. She sat down across from me while the officer stood nearby. She pulled out a notebook and told me she needed to take a brief on record statement about everything that happened tonight. I started going through everything from the moment I saw the first anonymous text to when the brothers broke into my apartment and I escaped through the maintenance corridor. Kira wrote notes quickly and asked specific questions about times and exact words people said. Then she pulled out her phone and made a call. She put it on speaker, and a man's voice answered after 2 rings. "This is Malcolm Dean." Kira told him she had me at the library and we needed to discuss next steps. Malcolm asked her to summarize the situation, and she ran through the basics in about 90 seconds. Then Malcolm started asking me questions directly through the phone. He wanted to know if I could provide expanded testimony beyond just my original tip from 8 months ago. He asked if I knew details about their operations, their contacts, their money sources. I told him I knew some things from when I lived near them, but not everything. He pressed harder, asking what specifically I could testify to, and I felt myself getting annoyed because it seemed like he cared more about what I could give him than about keeping me alive. I interrupted him and said I needed to know what kind of protection I would actually get if I agreed to testify. Malcolm went quiet for a second, then started talking about standard protocols and witness assistance programs. I asked him to be specific about guarantees, and he said he couldn't make absolute promises, but they would do everything possible within their resources. That answer frustrated me because it basically meant the system had limits, and I was still vulnerable no matter what I did. I told him I needed concrete details about where I would stay and how long protection would last. He said they could arrange temporary housing and provide police check-ins, but long-term protection depended on threat assessment and available funding. Kira jumped in and said she would personally make sure I had direct contact with her at all times. My phone buzzed with a text from Mercedes while Malcolm was still talking. I glanced at it and felt my stomach drop. The brothers had disappeared from her tracking map. All 3 location dots were just gone. I held up my hand to stop Malcolm mid-sentence and told him the brothers weren't showing up on tracking anymore. Kira asked what that meant, and I explained about Mercedes tracking them through a synced account. Mercedes had sent another text saying they either found the account or ditched their phones, which meant we had no idea where they were now. The silence from not knowing their location felt worse than seeing them close by, because at least before I could avoid them. Malcolm asked if Mercedes was willing to come forward as a witness, and I said she refused but was helping anonymously. He made a frustrated sound and said anonymous evidence was harder to use in court. Kira told Malcolm we needed to focus on immediate safety first and prosecution second. She asked me if I was willing to relocate temporarily while they figured out the leak situation. I asked what leak, and she explained that my new identity from 8 months ago shouldn't have been accessible to anyone outside law enforcement. She said there was likely someone at the courthouse or in the system who gave information to the brothers or their contacts. I felt angry hearing that because I had done everything right and changed my whole life, and someone just handed me over anyway. Kira said she was starting an internal inquiry to find the source, but she admitted it would take time and probably wouldn't help me right now. Malcolm said the priority was getting me somewhere safe while they built a case. Kira suggested a decoy operation where police would maintain a visible presence at my apartment building while I got moved to a motel under a different name. I asked how that would work, and she explained they would make it look like I was still at the apartment with patrol cars nearby while I actually stayed somewhere else. I was cautious about the plan because it seemed like there were a lot of ways it could go wrong, but I didn't have many other options. I agreed, and Malcolm said he would start paperwork for emergency protective orders. Kira ended the call with him and started making arrangements with the uniformed officer. My phone buzzed again, and I looked down to see another text from Mercedes. My face must have shown something because Kira immediately asked what was wrong. I turned my phone toward her and showed her the message. Mercedes said the decoy plan had already leaked on a police scanner app that the brothers monitored. She warned there was a risk they were planning an ambush at the apartment. Kira cursed under her breath and grabbed her phone to make another call. She told someone on the other end to cancel the decoy operation immediately. Then she looked at me and said we needed a different approach. She asked the uniformed officer to get his car ready and told me we were going to a different motel where I would pay cash under a fake name she would provide. She wrote down a name on a piece of paper and handed it to me along with specific instructions about what to say at the desk. The uniformed officer led us out through the library's back exit to where his patrol car was parked. I got in the back seat and kept my head down while he drove. Kira followed in her own car. We drove for about 20 minutes to the edge of town, where the buildings got more run down and spread out. The motel was a single-story place with peeling paint and a flickering sign. Kira had already called ahead because the desk clerk barely looked at me when I walked in. I used the fake name she gave me and paid cash for 3 nights. The clerk handed me a key attached to a large plastic tag and pointed toward room 12. The room smelled like old cigarettes and cleaning chemicals. There was a bed with a thin comforter, a small TV bolted to the dresser, and a bathroom with rust stains in the sink. Kira came in behind me and checked the locks on the door and window. She gave me her direct number again and told me to call immediately if anything felt wrong. The uniformed officer stayed outside for a while to make sure nobody followed us. After they left, I sat on the bed and tried to process everything. My phone showed messages from Darren asking if I was okay and if I knew what was happening at the building. I texted back that I was safe but couldn't explain more. Then I saw a notification that police were still running the decoy presence at my apartment, even though I wasn't there. About an hour later, Kira texted me that Miguel had been detained near the property during a weapons check. I felt a small bit of relief until she sent another message saying he got released after a few hours because he wasn't actually on the property and his weapon was legally registered. The whole thing felt pointless. I tried to sleep but kept watching the door and jumping at every sound from outside. Car doors slamming, people talking, footsteps on the concrete walkway. Around 2 in the morning, my phone lit up with notifications. Someone had posted my old name and photo on social media with a vague accusation about being a snitch. The post didn't mention the brothers directly, but anyone who knew the situation would understand what it meant. By morning, the post had been shared dozens of times. I got an email from my workplace saying I was suspended pending an investigation into the allegations. I stared at the email feeling a mix of shame and rage because I had done the right thing by reporting criminals, and now I was the one losing my job and hiding in a terrible motel room while they walked around free. I grabbed my phone and texted Kira about the suspension email, my hands still shaking from reading it. She responded within 5 minutes saying this was a common retaliation tactic and she'd seen it happen to other witnesses before. Her next message said there wasn't much she could do about employment issues since that fell outside police jurisdiction. I stared at those words, feeling the unfairness of it all sink deeper into my chest. The next morning, I woke up to sunlight coming through the thin motel curtains and 3 missed calls from Malcolm. I called him back and he said he wanted to do a video statement while everything was still fresh in my mind. I set up my phone on the dresser and hit record while Malcolm joined through a video call on his laptop. I walked through the entire timeline starting with my original tip 8 months ago when I first saw the brothers moving into the apartment below mine. I described their late-night visitors and the packages they carried in and out at weird hours. Then I covered last night's attack, starting with the anonymous warnings and ending with me hiding in this motel. Malcolm took notes the whole time and asked specific questions about times and locations. When I finished, he said this gave him enough evidence to move forward with formal charges against all 3 brothers. He ended the call saying he'd be in touch soon about next steps. 2 hours later, Kira texted me that Malcolm had filed for an emergency protective order against Miguel, Carlos, and Ramon. She explained the order was basically just paper and wouldn't physically stop them if they wanted to come after me. But it gave police more authority to arrest them immediately if they came within 500 feet of me or contacted me in any way. Malcolm also added stalking charges to the existing case based on the photos they'd taken and the surveillance they'd done for 3 weeks. I felt a small bit of relief knowing there were actual legal consequences building up, even if the protection itself was limited. Around noon, my phone buzzed with a notification from an unknown number, and my heart jumped until I saw it was a voice memo file. I downloaded it and hit play hearing Carlos talking to someone in Spanish about making an example of me so other potential witnesses would know what happens to snitches. The recording was clear enough that I could make out his voice and specific threats. I saved the file immediately and forwarded it to both Kira and Malcolm. The evidence validated everything I'd been saying, but it also made me worried about whoever recorded this getting that close to Carlos. I texted back asking if this was Mercedes and got a response confirming it was her. I typed out a message asking if she was safe doing this and whether the brothers suspected anything. She replied that she was careful and knew how to stay off their radar. I asked again who she was and why she was helping me. Her response said she had her reasons and I should focus on staying alive instead of asking questions about her identity. I wanted to push harder for answers, but I also knew she was risking a lot to help me. Late afternoon, Kira called saying she'd secured an arrest warrant for Ramon on multiple felony charges including vandalism, attempted break-in, and stalking. She sounded pleased when she told me this, but then warned that Miguel and Carlos were still free and the brothers had enough resources to make bail quickly, even if Ramon got arrested. I asked what that meant for my safety, and she said I needed to be moved again to somewhere more secure than this motel. By evening, a county victim services coordinator had arranged a safe apartment with basic security features. Kira drove me there herself, and we pulled up to a plain building that looked like every other apartment complex in the area. The unit had a deadbolt lock that actually worked, and a doorbell camera that fed to an app on my phone. The place was small and depressing with blank walls and furniture that looked like it came from a donation center, but it was better than the motel, and I had my own space. Kira gave me a direct number to call her anytime, day or night, and made me promise to check in twice daily. After she left, I sat on the couch and tried to process everything that had happened in less than 24 hours. My phone buzzed with a text from Darren saying other tenants at the building were angry about the damage and disruption. Some of them were blaming me for bringing this trouble to the complex. His message said people were talking about me in the hallway and asking why I'd gotten involved with cartel members in the first place. The words stung because I understood their frustration about having their building torn apart, but I also didn't ask to be hunted by criminals just because I'd reported illegal activity happening right below my apartment. I texted back thanking Darren for letting me know and asking him to stay safe. The next morning, my landlord sent a formal notice through email terminating my lease due to property damage and safety concerns for other residents. The message was cold and businesslike with no acknowledgement of the fact that I was a victim in all this. I responded asking about my security deposit since I'd paid first and last month plus deposit when I moved in. We went back and forth through several texts, and eventually I negotiated getting half the deposit back. I was still losing over $1,000 in my home because of something that wasn't my fault. Malcolm called that afternoon saying he'd secured limited relocation funds from a victim assistance program. I felt hopeful until he explained the money came with conditions requiring me to testify at multiple hearings over the next several months. He laid out a schedule of preliminary hearings, depositions, and potentially a full trial if the brothers didn't take plea deals. I asked how much the relocation funds would cover, and he said enough for a few months' rent and basic expenses. It wasn't much, but I needed the financial help badly after losing my job and my deposit. I agreed to the conditions, even though I was frustrated that everything had a price attached and nothing came without strings. Kira called me the next day and told me she was trying to reach Mercedes through the number she'd been texting from. She wanted Mercedes to consider witness protection, or at least accept some kind of police protection, since she'd put herself at risk by helping me. I waited by my phone hoping Mercedes would agree to stay safe. 2 hours later, Kira texted me that Mercedes had refused any official protection. She said Mercedes told her she knew how to handle herself and had her own plans to leave town for a while. Then my phone buzzed with a message from a new number I didn't recognize. It was Mercedes telling me she was heading out of state and wishing me luck with everything. She said she'd check in occasionally, but I shouldn't worry about her. I texted back thanking her for saving my life, and she just sent a thumbs-up emoji. That was it. The person who'd warned me and tracked the brothers for me was gone, and I still didn't really know who she was or why she'd helped me. 2 weeks crawled by in that safe apartment with me barely leaving except for necessities. Malcolm called to tell me the preliminary hearing was scheduled, and I needed to testify under seal in a closed courtroom. I asked what that meant, and he explained only essential people would be present, and my testimony wouldn't be public record. The morning of the hearing, Kira picked me up and drove me to the courthouse through a back entrance. We went through empty hallways to a small courtroom that felt more like a conference room. The judge sat at the front, and the defense attorney was there with Ramon in an orange jumpsuit and handcuffs. Miguel and Carlos weren't present, but I could feel my hands shaking knowing they were still out there somewhere. I took the stand and answered Malcolm's questions about the original tip I'd made 8 months ago and everything that happened the night they came after me. The defense attorney challenged me hard, asking how I could be sure the screenshots were real and questioning why I'd waited so long to report them initially. I explained I'd been scared for my life, and the screenshots matched exactly what happened that night. The judge listened carefully and asked a few questions of his own. After about an hour, he said he found enough cause to move forward with the case. Malcolm looked satisfied, but I just felt drained from reliving everything in front of strangers. Outside the courtroom, Kira pulled me aside and gave me the bail results. Ramon was being held without bail because the judge considered him a flight risk, and the charges were serious enough to justify keeping him locked up. But Miguel and Carlos had both made bail with stay-away orders attached. I felt my stomach drop hearing that 2 of them were going to be back on the streets. Kira tried to reassure me by saying at least Ramon was the oldest and the leader, so having him locked up was significant. But I couldn't stop thinking about Miguel and Carlos being free to move around even with the stay-away orders. I asked her what those orders actually meant, and she explained they couldn't come within 500 feet of me or my home or workplace. If they did, they'd be arrested immediately. I pointed out that they'd already tried to kill me, so a piece of paper wasn't going to stop them. She agreed it was a mixed outcome, and told me we needed to be extra careful going forward. Over the next few days, Kira worked with me to create a detailed safety plan. She came to my apartment with a folder full of documents and maps. We went through alternate routes to anywhere I might need to go, like the grocery store or pharmacy. She had me memorize code words for different types of emergencies, so I could communicate danger without being obvious if someone was listening. We set up scheduled check-ins twice a day where I'd text her a specific emoji to show I was okay. If I missed a check-in, she'd send someone to my location immediately. Kira also helped me contact my employer on limited terms. We drafted an email explaining that I was involved in a criminal case as a witness and needed to work remotely for safety reasons without revealing my exact location. My boss wasn't happy about it, but agreed to let me work from home temporarily. The whole process took hours, and by the end I felt exhausted, but slightly more secure knowing there was an actual plan in place. 3 weeks after everything started, Malcolm called to tell me the relocation funds had been approved for a longer-term arrangement. He'd found a new apartment complex in a different neighborhood under the alias Kira had helped me establish. I packed up my few belongings from the safe apartment, and Kira drove me to the new place. The building was newer than my old one, with actual working security cameras and a front desk that was staffed 24 hours. My apartment was on the 3rd floor, and it was small and generic with beige walls and basic furniture. The kitchen had cheap appliances, and the bathroom had a shower with low water pressure, but it had a good deadbolt lock, and the windows had screens that couldn't be removed from the outside. I walked through the space feeling disconnected from it, like I was staying in a hotel room instead of an actual home. Kira helped me set up the doorbell camera and showed me how to check it from my phone. She reminded me about the check-ins and told me to vary my routine so I wasn't predictable. After she left, I sat on the couch and tried to imagine building some kind of normal life here. It felt impossible, but I didn't have any other options. The next few weeks fell into a strange pattern. I kept in touch with Kira through encrypted messaging apps she'd set up on my phone. She sent me updates about the case progress and reminded me about upcoming court dates. Mercedes texted me occasionally from different numbers just to check in. Her messages were always brief, like asking if I was okay or telling me to stay safe. I'd respond thanking her and she'd go quiet again for days. I still didn't know her real story or why she cared about helping me, but I was grateful she was still watching out for me somehow. The encrypted apps made me feel like I was living in a spy movie, except everything was real and the danger wasn't going away. I started keeping my phone on me constantly even when I showered because I was scared I'd miss an important message. Malcolm scheduled a grand jury testimony date 6 weeks out and called me to walk through what to expect. He was more personable this time now that I'd committed to cooperating fully. He explained the grand jury would hear evidence and decide whether to indict the brothers on the charges. My testimony would be crucial because I was the target of their actions. He asked me questions about what I'd say and helped me organize my thoughts so I'd be clear and credible. Near the end of the call, he admitted the courthouse leak investigation was moving slowly, but they'd identified some possible sources. He said it might have been a clerk or someone in the filing office who had access to sealed documents. I asked if they'd found proof yet, and he said no, but they were working on it. The conversation left me feeling frustrated that the people who were supposed to protect me had failed so badly, but at least they were trying to fix it. The anxiety from everything was getting worse, and I was having trouble sleeping and eating normally. I'd jump at every noise in the hallway and spend hours checking the doorbell camera for anyone suspicious. Kira noticed during one of our check-ins and told me about a therapist available through the Victim Assistance Program. I was hesitant at first because talking to a stranger about my fear felt pointless, but she convinced me to try at least one session. The therapist was a woman who worked from a small office near the courthouse. She asked me about what I was experiencing, and I told her about the constant fear and how I couldn't relax even in my own apartment. She taught me grounding techniques like focusing on 5 things I could see and 4 things I could touch. She explained that my constant fear was a normal response to an abnormal situation and that my brain was trying to protect me by staying alert. Hearing that it was normal helped a little. She gave me breathing exercises to try when I felt panic coming on. I left the session feeling slightly less broken, even though nothing about my situation had actually changed. A few days later, Kira called me with news that made my chest tight. Carlos had violated his stay-away order by showing up near my old workplace asking about me. Someone who still worked there recognized him from the news coverage and called the police. Carlos got arrested and was being held for 72 hours while they processed the violation. Kira told me this was actually good because it showed the court he was a continued threat. She said it might affect his bail status going forward and could lead to him being held without bail like Ramon. I asked what would happen after the 72 hours, and she said they'd have a hearing to decide. I spent those 3 days barely sleeping, wondering if Carlos would get released again or if they'd finally keep him locked up. The violation proved that the stay-away orders weren't enough to stop them, and that scared me more than anything. I needed money coming in and couldn't keep relying entirely on the relocation funds. I started looking for remote work that I could do under my alias. Most jobs wanted references or background checks, which was complicated given my situation. After 2 weeks of searching, I found a small company that needed someone to do data entry and customer service through email. The pay was less than half what I'd made at my old job, but it was something. I went through their hiring process using the identity Kira had helped me establish, and they accepted me without too many questions. My first day working from my apartment felt strange sitting at my kitchen table, responding to customer emails about boring product questions. But it was also a relief to have something to focus on besides my fear. The financial stress was still real, because the pay barely covered my expenses even with the relocation funds helping. But at least I was working again instead of just hiding and waiting for something bad to happen. A month passed with me checking in with Kira twice daily and working my remote job from the kitchen table. Malcolm called me on a Tuesday morning and told me the grand jury had finished reviewing the evidence. All 3 brothers got indicted on multiple felony counts including conspiracy, stalking, witness intimidation, and attempted assault. He said this was a big victory because it meant the case was strong enough to actually go to trial if needed. I asked him what happened next, and he explained that Ramon's attorney was already trying to work out a plea deal. The deal would involve reduced charges in exchange for information about who leaked my location from the courthouse. Malcolm brought me into a conference call with the prosecutor's office to discuss whether I'd accept that kind of trade. I told them I wanted accountability for what the brothers did to me, not just information swaps that let them off easier. The prosecutor said she understood, but that getting the leak source was important for preventing future cases like mine. I said I'd think about it, but I wasn't promising anything. 3 days later, Kira called with news that made me actually smile for the first time in weeks. Miguel and Carlos both had their bail revoked after the grand jury indictment because the charges got upgraded to more serious felonies. She told me all 3 brothers were now sitting in county jail with no bail option. I sat down on my couch and took the first deep breath I'd managed since this whole thing started. Knowing they were all locked up felt like someone had lifted a weight off my chest that I'd been carrying for so long I forgot what it felt like without it. The relief didn't make me less anxious, but it gave me space to think about something other than immediate survival. 2 weeks after that, I had to testify at a formal hearing about the courthouse leak investigation. I sat in a small room with a court reporter and 2 investigators and walked them through every detail of how I'd changed my name and moved states. They asked specific questions about who knew my new identity, and when I first realized it had been compromised, my testimony helped them identify a clerk who had been selling witness information to defense attorneys for cash. The clerk got arrested that same week, and I felt some actual satisfaction knowing the system was fixing the problem that nearly got me killed. Malcolm called again to tell me the trial date got set for 4 months out. He explained that all 3 brothers would probably accept plea deals rather than risk going to trial and getting longer sentences. He walked me through the possible outcomes ranging from 3 years to 10 years, depending on their criminal histories and which charges stuck. I started to believe that maybe this would actually end with real consequences, instead of them just walking free or getting a slap on the wrist. 6 weeks after the attack, I joined a gym 3 blocks from my new apartment. I went early in the morning when it was mostly empty and kept my headphones in the whole time. Working out helped burn off some of the constant nervous energy that made it hard to sleep. I also found a community group online for people in witness protection or similar situations. We met once a week in a private room at a community center, and nobody used their real names. Hearing other people's stories made me feel less alone and less like I was losing my mind from the stress. A woman named Sarah talked about how she'd been in protection for 2 years and still jumped at loud noises. A guy named Mike described the same kind of hypervigilance I was dealing with, where he couldn't stop checking over his shoulder. These people understood what I was going through in a way my therapist couldn't fully grasp. I started developing actual friendships instead of just hiding in my apartment all the time. I even went to coffee with Sarah after one of the meetings, and we talked about normal stuff like movies and music. It felt good to be around someone who knew my situation, but didn't treat me like I was broken. Kira texted me on a Thursday afternoon 7 weeks after everything started. All 3 brothers had accepted plea deals with the prosecutor's office. Ramon got 8 years because of his prior record and leadership role. Carlos got 6 years. Miguel got 5 years because he was younger and had fewer priors. The deals included strict provisions that they couldn't contact me or retaliate in any way. If they violated those terms, they'd face additional felony charges and longer sentences. Kira told me this was a really good outcome considering how these cases usually went. I asked her if I was actually safe now, and she said nothing was guaranteed, but having them locked up for years gave me time to rebuild my life. 3 months after the night they tried to break down my door, I sat in my new apartment eating leftover pizza for dinner. I realized I hadn't checked over my shoulder or looked out the window in over an hour. My phone buzzed with a text from Kira using our code word that meant everything was quiet on her end. I sent back the response code that meant I was okay. Life wasn't perfect, and I still dealt with anxiety that made it hard to sleep some nights. But I was alive, and the people who tried to kill me were locked up in prison. That felt like the best outcome I could have hoped for, given how everything started with that anonymous warning text. I still didn't know who Mercedes really was or why she helped me, but I was grateful she'd given me enough warning to survive. The system had failed me in some ways with the courthouse leak and the initial 911 response, but it had also worked in other ways with Kira's help and Malcolm pushing for real charges. I was learning to live with the fact that nothing was ever going to feel completely safe again. The hypervigilance was probably permanent, and I'd always be looking over my shoulder to some degree. But I had a new name, a new apartment, a job, and some friends who understood what I'd been through. The brothers were behind bars and I was still here. That had to count for something. That's my take on it, but I know you've got your own version. Would you have done the same thing? Tell me in the comments because I love seeing how differently everyone sees the same story. I'll be checking through them later.